Hello and welcome to the Sprint 147 review of ManageIQ. As usual, I'll provide the overview. Harpreet will update us on the UI, Adam on the providers, Joe on the platform, and Alberto on the API. Okay. This sprint, we had a market increase in both the number of pull requests opened and the number of pull requests merged. The blue line is the number of pull requests merged, and you can see that it's up almost 25% and bigger than anything that we've had in a long since 138 or even before. And same goes for the green line, the number of pairs opened. I attribute most of this actually to all of the contributions from the IBM teams. There are multiple of them. Working on the various providers and the UI and some other areas. So it's really been kind of great to see IBM's involvement in the project. In terms of enhancements versus bugs, you can see that the number of bug fixes has remained steady at around 50, 55, while the number of enhancement PRs have climbed significantly. As we work towards finalizing the next release, the Kasparov release, and we hope to be getting a beta out hopefully by the next sprint review. In terms of the health of the repositories, I'll present these two tables here without any comments, except that I think things are holding steady. And we're still trying to figure out how to represent this in more of a graphical nature so we can see how the health of the repositories is improving or not over time. Here's the provider repositories, and the list just keeps getting bigger and bigger. I'm anticipating that at some point we may need two screens of this as we get more providers supported in ManageIQ. And with that, I'll turn it over to Harpreet.
Thanks, Oleg. Hello, everyone. Total of 44 PRs were merged in UI repos. Out of that, 10 were bug fixes, 17 enhancements, some cleanup, and fewer dependencies related PRs. Thanks to IBM team, they have added a lot of enhancements during the sprint. I have listed main enhancements here with the PR links and have some of them with screenshots on following slides. So with that, next slide, please. A console link was added on a configuration profile details screen to provide an access to the IBM Terraform template console for the records that support this feature. A new RBAC feature was added to product features area for this new feature. Next slide, please. Support for native viewer button for Red Hat providers and to allow connection file to be downloaded was done in previous sprints. This PR is just a rework of the original PR to support the same feature in Ivanchuk. With that, next slide, please. A name field was added to the list of configuration profiles. This makes it consistent with the other list views. A name field was already present on the details screen, so it was just an add on the list view. Next slide, please. Cloud tenant placement field was added to add new subnet form. This field is only available and a required field only when OpenStack Network Manager type is being added. Next slide, please. Some new additions were made to storage area. A new subtab storage resources is added under storage that displays list and details view for AutoSDE block storage managers. And it has product features in the product feature tree as well. Next slide, please. On the block storage managers list and detail screen, add and edit block storage manager buttons were added. So AutoSDE managers can be directly added or edited. Currently, edit button is only available for these type of managers only. Next slide, please. And finally, a support to be able to add IBM Cloud Power virtual servers is added on the Add Cloud Volume form. And that is all for the UI. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Harpreet. So for the provider side, in core, we changed the way that we're doing refresh for combined managers, which was most of the cloud managers. Previously, we had a JSON array in the queue name if we had a set of managers, so it would be like a comma-separated list. It required us to do a JSON parse for all worker queue names, even though most of them were not like this, and it would catch the exception and fall back to a regular, singular property, which never really worked really well. It was always a little bit finicky because the order mattered because it was doing a direct match. So we refactored that. So now we simply just delegate the queue name for the child managers up to the parent manager, and we can go back to having a regular queue name without any arrays in there. So that was a nice little. We also fixed an issue. There's actually a really long-standing issue with authentications. So we have multiple different types of authentications, like a bunch of models. There's a user ID password and a auth token type of subclasses. The STI initializer was overridden and it was ignoring any type passed to it, and it was just defaulting to auth user ID password. We found this because it was causing any providers which were created with an auth token type to not have their initial authentication check queued. And so walking it back, it turned out that the subclass type was incorrect when it was being initialized because it was ignoring that type property. So got that fixed up. That was maybe a 10-year-old bug in the authentications new, so that was a cool fix. And next slide. On Amazon, we fixed the tenant ID not being set for child managers. Last sprint, we did this for, I believe, Google and Azure, but Amazon had the same bug, so now that's also being set on all the child managers. Ansible Tower, we had a bug where the refresh worker wasn't being started because we delegated the zone up to the provider, and so doing a where on the class name wasn't picking it up. So we have a couple other of these small cleanups where delegates to providers or parent managers are not working properly, so you'll probably see a couple bug fixes trickling over the next sprint or two. For the IBM Terraform side, as Harpreet mentioned, we're adding a console URL for the configuration profiles, and next sprint will also be one for the configured systems. And also pulled in the host name attribute from IBM Terraform, which is what we're setting the name to now. Next slide. So the IBM Cloud provider is where almost a huge number of PRs came in. These guys are doing a great set of work. They're adding, so Power previously had been all discovery. They're going through and adding a lot of operations now. So you can now do reboots on the instances. They support both hard and soft resets for the instances, so reboot and reset in our parlance. They also added support for cloud volume creation as well as attach and detach operations. We're also improving the error message. If you validate the credentials and they fail, we're passing back a more user-friendly message there. We're also collecting if a cloud volume is able to be attached to multiple instances at once. This allows us to do some error checking when you go to do the attach operation. And we're also collecting now storage types and flavors and using that to help in provisioning instances so that the user can select what type of storage type and flavor that they want the instance they're provisioning to be for. On the virtual private cloud side, Brad added a storage manager, so now we're collecting cloud volumes from VPC as well. We're also discovering network ports and linking those over to cloud subnets, and we're detecting the bitness of instances on VPC, so whether it's 32 or 64-bit. Next slide. On vSphere, vSphere 6.7 added a new attribute to the VM called createDate. This is helpful if we are discovering VMs that we didn't provision. There's really no other way to tell when the VM got created other than looking for events to see when the VM got created in the event streams table. But the problem is we purge events, so after 6 months or so, it wouldn't be possible to tell when a VM was created. We're now able to get this from inventory, set it to the EMS created on column, and you can tell for sure exactly when the VM was created. We also fixed, this was an interesting one, so when we get the date for a snapshot create time back from VMware, they were truncating all of the zeros at the end of the date, so it worked for 90% of the cases. But if snapshot got created with 0.1500 milliseconds. It was being truncated, and so we were doing a hash lookup on that, and it was failing. So that was an interesting one to track down. Our friends in the Netherlands from KPN helped us find that one, and we're now parsing the time on the operations side the same way that we are on the inventory side, so those two are matching. Lucy helped refactor the VMware Infra Manager Connect method now that we're connecting to both the Vim SDK as well as the CIS API from the vSphere automation. So we were calling that from both operations for provisioning as well as inventory collection. So now that connection method is shared in one place. We also fixed a bug where the join table for storages to VMs and templates wasn't being populated by graph refresh. That was causing Smart State to not pick up the data store properly to be able to tell whether it could use a smart proxy or not. We also fixed distributed virtual port group deletion. There was a bug where it was also deleting the switch and then bringing the switch back on the next refresh. So we got that fixed up. And the big headline feature is content library provisioning is functional as of this sprint. And so Lucy finished up a long set of work on those 3 PRs to get it working. There are some PRs to core too to add some base stuff. But if we go to the next slide, we'll have a video demo that Lucy put together of this. So we are collecting the content library OVFs as orchestration templates. And we're able to provision them through the generic service catalog. So you can see there's a new VMware content library type. Go through and we're going to create the catalog item here. And I think you just need the template and the VM name. So you can, when you provision an OVF, a lot of times there can be an end user license agreement. So we have a checkbox here to allow the user to accept those. And then you can pick the target where you want to provision the VM to. So similar to regular VM provisioning, you pick the resource pool in the folder and the host optionally if you want to, unless it's in the DRS cluster, in which case you don't need to. And so now there's the service catalog item added. Now let's go and order one. So what this is doing is using the generic service provisioning support that we've had for a while. And so that got submitted. And everybody loves a command line demo. So it's going through and starting to deploy the content library from vSphere. And we should be able to see some tasks over on the vSphere UI shortly, but it's going through and setting everything up at the start of the provision. So the content libraries are actually OVFs, and so a lot of this code will probably be able to reuse to allow for OVF deployment as well. If we could get access to where the OVF is located, we can pretty much reuse the same code. And so here you can see it's fetching the content library. These content libraries can either be remote or local, and so the first step is to fetch it locally if you're trying to provision from a remote one, and then it starts the deploy OVF template task. I think this is a blank template, so it shouldn't take too long. It's always good for demos to deploy VMs that don't have any disks. And there we go, the fetch and the deploy finished. And so we picked up that it completed. Finishing up and cleaning up over on this side. Doing all the post-provision stuff that we always do. And we'll also pick up that pick up the VM that got created in refresh. All right, so we should be able to go back and take a look at the request and see that it's finished. There it is. And take a look at the service that got created. And there it is. And you can see the demo VMs linked up with the service, so you can tell what it got provisioned from. And that's it for that. In other news for providers, we added a new AutoSD provider, which Harpreet mentioned, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail next sprint with an in-depth demo. And that's it for providers. Over to Joe.
Excellent, Adam, and thank you. So 45 PRs were merged across the platform space this sprint, starting with the noteworthy enhancements. A fair bit of work had been done, contributed to improving password handling. NTP was removed from the ManageIQ app because it makes more sense to configure time and time zone synchronization at the time of deployment with tools like Cockpit. An enhancement was contributed to store the MIQ GUID for the orchestrator in the CR, and this change addresses multiple issues. If the CR is recreated, the UID changes, so the orchestrator would exit with new replication is not supported, and this enhancement will persist the UID, avoiding that problem. And also, if there's a database import from an appliance, it's easier to do because the GUID from the existing appliance can be specified. And the generation of a new UUID can be avoided as this uses the CR's UID as the default. And one noteworthy bug was addressed. In the past, Ansible Runner is alive could report erroneous results based on the current state of the PID file that it was checking. This was addressed by using iNotify and FSNotify to catch file system events, using watches for the PID file activity. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I thought it would be worth listing them as a fair amount of work had been contributed this sprint for the documentation improvements. Much of the work was contributed by Dan Hawkins, so a big shout out and thank you to Dan for all the work he's done to improve our docs this sprint. And that's it for the platform space. Let's move on to Alberto and the API.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, so for the API, we have one enhancement that was made by Elia K. Here she added the ability to create physical storages. So it's standard, post create action on the API physical storages endpoints. Here showing an example, the name, the related EMS ID, physical storage family, and so on. And again, regular post that's async, and it returns the standard result, the action signature that would include the task ID and href of the creation. That can be queried later. And that's it for the API. Next slide.
All right, and so that brings this sprint to a close. The next sprint review is going to be in 2 weeks, sprint 148, October 28th, at the same time. And as always, I'd like to thank all the contributors and all the presenters for making this sprint what it is. As I mentioned at the outset, this was kind of the highest number of pull requests merged and created in a long time. So thank you, everyone. And I really want to, it's really kind of great to see the community stepping up and accelerating. And I'm looking forward to a lot of great things going forward. Thank you, everyone.